Hello, it's Amelia here from Undercover Architect. In this interview, I chat to Narelle McDonald of Healthy Living Spaces. Now, Narelle is a building biologist. Now, if you don't know about building biology, it's a field of expertise where a professional such as Narelle can help you understand what it's going to take to create a healthy, low-tox environment in your new build or renovation. Unfortunately, in this day and age, we're surrounded by loads of chemicals, loads of things that don't necessarily support our health and well-being, and this can be particularly relevant when you're building or renovating in the types of materials and products you choose to put in your home. It can also relate to how you ventilate your home, how you orient it for the natural movement of the sun, and even how you lay out the electrical wiring and all of those types of things in how you might create electromagnetic fields in your home. We have lots of problems these days with allergies, with chemical sensitivities, with electrical sensitivities that can cause a lot of people very poor health, and sometimes they're not even aware of how much their environment is contributing to this. And when we spend, as stats say, 80 to 90% of our time indoors, the performance of your home and how it can contribute to your health and well-being can play a massive role in improving it overall and in lowering the burden that you have in your life of chemicals and hazardous things in your environment. Narelle shares loads of helpful tips and information that is relevant to anyone building or renovating anywhere, and she gives you some key things to focus on and to pay attention to when thinking about your build or renovation if you do want to consider this as part of your process. And she also shares some resources that are going to be really helpful for you in creating a healthier home for yourself. I hope you enjoy the interview.
Well, Narelle, it's fantastic to have you here. I'm really excited because building biology is one of those topics that I know a lot of people are interested in, but probably don't understand the nitty-gritty or the details or how it can really apply to them when they're building or renovating. So I'm really, really grateful to have you on the podcast and joining us today. Can you just actually give, in your words, an outline of what building biology actually is?
Sure, Amelia. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. Really, building biology is a field of environmental health, and we look at the different aspects of pollution that can be in our built environment, and we identify those that can potentially make us sick. The thing about building biology is it considers the relationship that we have between us and our buildings and the environment. And our primary focus as building biologists is on the health of the occupants. That comes number one for us. And we know that there are many health effects that are correlated with health hazards in the home, such as asthma and allergies and chronic fatiguing issues. And Australia currently has the second highest rate of allergies in the world. So if you didn't know that, but we do. So really, building biology has been around for quite a while, but not a lot of people in Australia know about it. It originated from the 1970s in Germany after the oil embargo, and we started to tighten our buildings, and we actually started to modify the way we built. It wasn't until the 1980s that the World Health Organization coined the term sick building syndrome, and it became a little bit more known. But yeah, I think the thing with building biology is that traditionally in the past we always built just to protect us from the elements. And then after World War II came along, there were so many changes. There was changing in our building practices, changing in our farming practices, the amount of chemicals that became common in the environment became ever increasing. So there was a whole host of changes that happened across a broad range of things, but particularly in the building industry. And so a lot of the traditional ways that we used to build were discarded because we wanted things faster, quicker. We started to look at that model of better living by chemistry, and so things started to change across the board.
That's amazing. And I mean, it's one of those things that I don't think people are aware has been around for as long as it has. And that, when you actually, I've talked on the podcast this season about how the stats show that we spend between 80 and 90% of our time indoors now. And when I look at what happens in commercial building practices and what's been happening in commercial building practices for a long time in terms of our office environments and our public building environments, that level of analysis about the health of the interiors yet that hasn't necessarily translated mainstream into how we go about building our homes and the types of materials and products that we choose to surround ourselves with. It's really still a niche area, isn't it? So it's quite amazing to see that it's just not more mainstream, that it's not more known by people who are building their or renovating their own homes.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I mean, I'm married to a builder. We've got a building business in Melbourne. And I look back to when we were doing some renovations earlier on in our lives. And, you know, I've got photos of me heavily pregnant, painting the architraves with oil-based paint, because I didn't know. I didn't have any idea. I just figured that if I was buying something, it was safe, it was regulated, and I didn't need to worry about that. I always assumed that that was looked after by somebody else. And especially because we've become so energy efficient and conscious, which is not a bad thing, because we definitely advocate, you know, to look after our environment and to be conscious of what we're doing. But we don't want that to come at the expense of the health of the occupants of the home. And so what's happening is, because those building envelopes have tightened, we haven't actually considered what we're actually bringing into the environment. So what happens is, because the materials contain a lot more chemicals, so if those chemicals can't be released from that environment and they're building up and there's a lack of fresh air exchange, well, then those VOCs, or volatile organic compounds, are hanging around inside the house and are being breathed in by the people that are living and working in those spaces.
Yeah. Can you tell me how you actually got into building biology? What was sort of your journey and how you became interested in it enough to actually turn it into your career?
Well, I think what happened was I've always loved buildings, always loved architecture. Like I said, pretty much every one of my brother-in-laws is in the trades. We've got a building business. I love old homes. We've renovated a few homes in Melbourne. And I just love bringing back those buildings to life. You know, it's a really special thing. I come from Perth originally, and there's a lot of project homes there. And even as a young child, I didn't like that style of building. I never have. It just didn't work for me. And so after I had the kids, I wanted to move into a health-related field, and I initially was going down the counselling road, and then I ended up studying at ACES because I love Feng Shui, and I used to do that as a bit of a hobby and stuff like that. And that was where I was introduced to building biology. And I had one of those sort of aha moments when I was sitting in the classroom and Nicole was talking, and I was listening to her thinking, this can't be right, you know. And so I immediately started studying building biology at the same time, because it just piqued my interest. And what it made me realise was I actually lived in a flat in London that was in a that caused me to have many, many health effects. So basically we moved into a brand new flat. It was one of the last flats we lived in London. Prior to that, we'd lived in a lot of house shares. They were older, run down. There would have been other issues in those houses, such as mould and potentially lead paint, that sort of thing. But in this new house, I was like, great, it's all new, you know, we're the first people to live there. Awesome, it's clean. But it had wall-to-wall carpet, synthetic. It had just been painted. It had a PVC lino in the kitchen, brand new cabinetry, all new soft furnishings, even had carpet in the bathroom, and it was the middle of winter. Yeah, and so of course we had massive condensation issues. We never opened a window because it was winter and it was freezing. Mold started to grow in the bathroom. And within weeks of moving in, I was really sick and I had chronic respiratory issues. I could not breathe properly. I was like, it undermined my health quite in a big way. And I went to many doctors and specialists, and no one could figure out what was going on. And what I remembered when I started studying building biology was like, no one ever asked me about my environment. And not once did I ever think that it was this new flat that I'd moved into. It never even crossed my mind. And yet, funnily enough, when we moved out, I got better. So, you know, it was like I was living in a plastic bag full of chemicals. And that's what can happen in these traditional new builds where lots of chemicals are introduced and there is not enough fresh air intake, and those VOCs don't migrate out of the building envelope. And we know now from recent studies that have been done by Tim Law and the University of Tasmania that in temperate climates in Australia, 1 in 4 builds will have condensation issues within the first year of its life, because the water vapour is not being migrated out of the building. So these are the things that we need to look at this. You know, this is a big problem here in Australia. So there's lots of things that we can improve about the way we're building, and understanding what we're doing and taking a little bit more time, I think, too, getting out of that mindset where we need to do things really fast and really quickly, and we're not considering, you know, our homes are one of our biggest investments. They're our castle, yeah? It's the Australian dream to have our own homes. So we want to make sure that those homes are going to provide nurturing and safe environments for us.
Yeah, it's very, very true. Perhaps we could talk a bit more about those mistakes that you do see people make. So you've mentioned the condensation issue, the VOC issue. So what do you see people, you know, and the taking time, when you see people building or renovating? You know, I think they can feel that this can be a big area that's really difficult to tackle without some specialist expertise. Some people aren't even aware of it when they sort of barrel in and they're given a raft of standard selections that a builder might be presenting to them or a designer might be presenting to them. What do you see are the common mistakes that people make that don't need to be made, you know, in terms of creating unhealthy environments for themselves?
Well, I think location is still not to be underestimated. Working with the sites, with the climate, with the topography, you know, we want to harness the natural energy of the sun and the wind and all of these things. So buying a house off a plan and then putting it on a block and not considering the orientation of that is a major problem. And they're often the houses that will have more issues because they'll cost more to heat and cool, and they'll have, if they've got, you know, if you're not harnessing the areas on the northern side and using the northern light, if you've got problems on the southern side, you will end up with condensation issues if you're using single pane glazing, you know, particularly in temperate climates, that sort of thing. But also, I find with this subject, there's so much greenwashing that it's not always a straightforward, oh, that's going to work in every scenario, in every circumstance. And that's what I mean about taking a little bit more time prior to beginning, a little bit of research and a little bit of thinking, because sometimes you may have to source some alternatives, and it's very hard to do that if the build started, and we know how many quick decisions you've got to make once the build started, and you often don't have time. You don't have time to research because the builder's saying, right, well, in 4 weeks' time, I need this, I need that, I need this, you know, the plumber's coming, you need to consider these sorts of things prior to the build. And also, I think, too, sitting down and working out how you use your spaces. What are your family's needs? Are you planning to stay there? You know, we actually get people to say, like, how are you going to use this room? Where is the bed going to go? Because I want to make sure that no services are going to be placed on the other side of the wall of where that bed is going. And if we don't consider this, then you can put the door in a certain place, the window in a certain place, the walk-in robe, and you've only got one spot left for that bed. And lo and behold, there's a service on the other side of that that's drawing a current. Then that's not ideal. That's not what we want. But if we just considered that beforehand, we could have worked with that, and then we wouldn't even be dealing with that issue. So that's the beauty. That's the beauty of this subject in building biology. It's one of my favourites because an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. You know, we don't have to try and fix the mistakes because we haven't made them. We've considered all this stuff at the beginning, and we're thinking about, okay, we want to create a low allergy home. This person is sensitive to dust, or they're asthmatic, or they've got chemical sensitivity. So we really need to be really aware of what we're bringing in, like, and how we ventilate, and, you know, do we then additionally use some air purifiers as well? Because it's very difficult to do a build with no chemicals unless you've got a block of land and you're doing like rammed earth, or, you know, like it's almost impossible in a sort of, I hate to use the word not normal, but in a
commercially sensitive way, in terms of what's available out there, really, isn't it? Yeah.
It's, it's, there really is no such thing as an adhesive without chemicals. They've tried things in the past like using soy glues and stuff, but they haven't had the results that they've needed with them. Waterproofing membranes can be a problem. Yes, there's a huge chemical content, but the service life on these products is 7 to 10 years. Now, who renovates their bathroom every 7 to 10 years? Nobody I know. So this is a problem, because these are supposed to last for a lot longer, but the products we're using only have a warranty of a certain amount. Braided water hoses are another thing that tend to break after 7 years. These can all lead to mold issues later on down the track if we're not aware of these things. So there's a fair bit to it, the layering of a building, I think. And I think, and like I often say to clients, we have to compromise, I suppose. But if the clients get really clear in their head at the beginning about their brief and really what's important to them, I think asking those questions at the very beginning. So what's important to you? What won't you compromise on? But what can we compromise on? And where can we save? Where can we save a little bit of money, but what will we spend more money on, because that's going to make a big difference. Like glazing is super important. Your floor finishes. I mean, if you finish a floor in polyurethane, it's going to off-gas for years, yeah? So let's look at some of these amazing different products that are on the market now. And from a building biologist perspective, we want our homes to be able to breathe. So the more hygroscopic materials that we can bring in, the better, because we want that building to breathe. And if we just coat everything in plastic, well, then that building can't breathe.
So can you then explain where does a building biologist come into the process? If a homeowner's working with directly, I find, some members of the UA community will go straight to a builder and work with the builder's draftsperson or designer to create their design and then move through the construction process. If they're renovating, they may do that as well, or they may go to a building designer or an architect and then, choose a builder from that point on. Where does a building biologist best come into that process to, I suppose, add that dimension of expertise to make all of those selections? And everything you're saying is music to my ears, because it's exactly what I talk to the UA community a lot about the importance of all of that preparation. I find a lot of people are barreling towards getting the thing built, and every minute of time that you spend in preparing before dirt gets turned on site is time well spent in getting yourself set up for a really seamless and efficient and smooth construction process. So I definitely love the fact that you're talking about, that preparation and the importance of that. Where do you ordinarily come in for your clients? How do building biologists work with people? How do they sleeve into that team to, because I can imagine some homeowners would be worried about, am I just going to rock the boat? Am I going to end up getting a builder charging me extra for all of these products? Is this going to complicate things? I do have allergies, or I've got children that have got asthma. It's important to me, but is it going to just make my life far more difficult? Is the building really going to be that bad? I can see all of those sort of concerns and objections. Where do you see it happening so that it goes as smoothly as possible and you're building together a like-minded team that actually is going to help you deliver a home that's healthy and, a low-tox environment for yourself?
Well, I think what you say about team too is important, because it is a team process in a build. You've not only got the client's needs, but you've got the builder to work with, you've got all the sub-trades, and then you've got the designers, etc. And I think just being aware of all the different skill sets that people can bring to the table as well. So ideally, if we come on board early in the process is better. It can often be a bit trickier if we're coming in later, because, I do offer different packages, but generally it's the great thing is to work with them from the very beginning, and then I get a detailed brief from the client and I produce a report based on what their needs are, and I can research and explore different materials, because each client will have a different thing that's really important to them, depending on what their situation is. And then they're given a report that they can refer to and go back to as a reference point, which will have supplies and things like that in it. So, and it will give them different options. I give a list of things to be included in the specifications with the builder. So I always encourage them to make sure they do work with a builder that is open and is happy to listen to them, and again, when they're hiring flooring contractors or anything like that, finding out if these flooring contractors are used to using different products, if they have had experience with natural wood oils, that sort of thing, because sometimes, they have to warranty it, so they want to make sure that they know how to use the product. But if their clients are aware of that from the very beginning, then it's a much seamless process, because that can be included in the specifications. It can be discussed with the builder, and it can be one of those things that are being addressed, from the very beginning. I know with our building business, when we changed a lot of what we were doing, like the flooring contractors would go and learn more about these products and that sort of thing. And it's about them having an open mind and being prepared to work with different products. Some will and some won't. And I get it, because they have to warranty it. I understand that. But I think we sort of need to move away from that, oh, well, this is all I use kind of thing, and be aware that there are more people out there now that want these products that are chemically sensitive, they're electrically sensitive, and they're impacted by biotoxin illness. And these are the people that are much more sensitive to this types of chemicals. So, they're like the canaries in the coal mine, I suppose. So we need to respect that and see what best ways we can help them. So we look at creating a low allergy home, preventing issues with condensation and mould, looking to minimise EMFs. A lot can be done with wiring at design stage. It's very difficult once the blaster board's on to start moving things. But that's what I was saying. If you look at the plan and you think, great, this is how I'm going to move this is how the bedroom's going to be set up, this is where the kids are going. How can I wire this and configure this so that it's going to work, it's going to work best for them, and then we don't have to worry about that later on. So we talk about all of those sorts of things, and so that they can already be addressing that in the electrical plan. And so if it's in the electrical plan and in the specifications, well, then it's not going to get missed and that sort of thing. And even like just, making sure no pesticides are used on site unless the owners are aware of it, that no services are put anywhere unless the owner has definitely said, yep, that's exactly where I want that service to go. Just things like that, because sometimes you'll get contractors come on and they might be in a hurry or whatever, and they're trying to get the job done. We had one where it was actually our house. And we had an aircon unit put on later, and of course the meter box was down at the front of the home, and so they literally just ran a cable straight through underneath the subfloor, straight through the guts of the home, which I wouldn't have recommended that. I would recommend they just use a little bit more cable and take it around, further around the side, that sort of thing. But I think, having that awareness and just being able to know that and understanding a little. You don't have to be an electrical engineer or anything like that, but just having that awareness and saying, no, actually, I don't want that. If you're going to do a builder's clean, then I don't want any chemicals used. I've just created this beautiful, sustainable, healthy home. I don't want a cleaner to come in and use a barrage of chemicals to clean it. It's stuff like that as well, I suppose.
Yeah, it's interesting because I know that I remember when I was first learning this information myself, thinking, oh my gosh, I've been killing my children. It's like, it's this whole kind of overwhelming thing. And I mentioned in the introduction, the house that we've moved into has the meter box directly on the outside wall of where mine and my husband's bedroom is. And we initially had our bed on the same wall as that meter box, and found that we just weren't sleeping very well. So we've moved the bed around, and the bed's actually now where I, as a designer, don't advise that the bed is, because you basically walk in beside the head of it. But layout wise, for where the meter board is in the house, it's what has to happen in this room. And the same thing where the internet comes into the house. There's all these sorts of things around electromagnetic fields, those EMFs, that I think can be quite nerve-wracking and scary for homeowners. The mold's another big one, because I know that there's a lot more, some of the UA community will also listen to Alex Stewart's Low Tox Life and know that she's had a lot of issues with mold illness over the past 12 months that have taken her a lot of investigation for her to navigate and get well again. And so, but I think what's really interesting is if you can instead frame it that there's always an opportunity to do a bit better. It doesn't have to be a complete skies falling in, we can't do this at all. There can be an opportunity just to make a different choice and have a better outcome that may not be 100%, but perhaps it's 60 or 70% of where you would have been before. And what I think too is there's lots of people wandering around that don't understand why they don't feel well. And they're doing what you said, going to doctors, getting, Alex was going to doctor after doctor and just not getting the answers that she felt were right. And it was only because she was so persistent and her field of specialty that she kept digging. But I know there's lots of people that they run out of steam. Whereas if it can be changed with the way that your home environment, is created, whether you're building or renovating, or you're just basically fixing where you currently are, it's actually a huge opportunity to make a change that is going to improve your health and well-being, which I think is really exciting, and a better way to think about it instead of getting really overwhelmed by it. Would you sort of...
I think you have to sometimes take a step back too, because if it is this is a big subject. Building biology itself is a big subject. We cover chemicals, allergens, mold, water, EMFs. It's massive. So, but at the same time, we have to look at where the occupants are living and what can we actually do about it. They may be renting, so then if they're renting, then we're more limited into what we can do. So we look at the different options that we can do in a rental environment. If they're renovating, awesome, because this is a great time because we can make some awesome changes within that environment and really set that house up. Sometimes, I moved into this place here in Kurrabell and it's 20 years old. So, there's some aspects of it that are good and some not so good. So I had to get an electrician out when we first moved in and, Ethernet cable, data points through the house and things like that, but we're a bit short on data points. So sometimes we've got Ethernet cables running around with, but it works for us at the time being. And once we do more work, because we're going to renovate this, then we will tackle those things. So sometimes we just put some interim measures in place and then work around that. And it can depend on the client too. Like if you're dealing with people that are electrically sensitive, then a lot more attention needs to be paid to that side of things in some ways, But definitely the problem with electrical hypersensitivity, multiple chemical sensitivity and biotoxin illness, they all have very similar biomarkers. They're a multi-symptom, multi-system diseases, and so that's why a lot of the doctors, when these patients present to them, can't quite initially figure out what's going on with them. So we need to do everything we can to lighten the load for them. Basically, we are surrounded by chemicals these days. There is a lot of chemicals on the market. Most of them haven't been tested for their impacts on human health. That's the reality of it. So this is where, as consumers, we still have power. As women, we control a lot of what comes into our houses. So we can say, no, I don't want those products. I'm not buying those products. I don't want the Ajax or the Pino Clean or whatever it may be. I'm going to support companies that are doing the right thing, that are using essential oils, that are ethical, that care about the environment, but they also care about me. So I'm going to spend my money on those products and not spend the money on the petrochemical solvent-based products. And so this is where we still have, power over what we do. We can't control everything out in the big wide world. It's just not possible. But in our home environments, we can. We still have a lot of control over them. So if we look at it like that. So we know that this is a big subject. Obviously, in building biology, we cover water, allergens, mold, EMFs, building materials and design. So there's a lot going on here. But if we just think about taking one thing at a time, if we're going to look at decluttering our house, if we just start with one small drawer. So if we're looking at this subject and we think, okay, so the first thing I really want to do is I don't have a water filter. I'm on town water. I realise that there's chlorine and fluoride. My child's got eczema. So I'm actually going to install a bath and shower filter and get a water filter for the point of view sink. Great. That's your first beginning of it. Then, looking at, do you just not drinking out of plastic bottles? So ensuring that you're either drinking out of glass or stainless steel for the kids, food grade. Maybe look at phasing out your Tupperware products and introducing glass, particularly for foods like spaghetti bolognese that you're going to freeze, where it's more likely to leach the chemicals if you freeze that in plastic. What are the small changes that I can make on this journey that are going to make a difference? Do I just start by turning off my wireless router at night and when it's not in use? Do I look at do I check the back of everybody's bed and see if there's any services running behind them? And if so, then I move those beds away from it. When we're talking about electric and magnetic fields, it's the inverse square rule. So if we put distance from the source, then it's actually really helpful. Radio frequencies is a little bit different. So looking at it from that perspective, what are the elements that I can change? And then incorporating those and then seeing what a difference that makes for you, rather than just going, oh my God, there's too much going on here and I'm not going to do anything. And that's, from a building biologist point of view, we don't want that. We want to empower our clients so they walk away and they think, okay, I'm just going to start with 3 things. That's all I'm going to start with, and I'm going to feel good about those things that I'm starting with. And then that's where they begin the journey. Even like I'm sure with food, I've had lots of gut issues over the years, and slowly, I've modified things, but I couldn't do it all at once. It's taken time to do all of those things. Even when I started studying this subject, it's taken time before I could change my linen or change certain aspects. I look back on the renovations that we did quite a few years ago and I think, wow, there's so much I would have done differently, but I didn't know. I mean, we put polyurethane on our back floor when we were joining up the old period home to the back bit, and we moved in 24 hours later because we didn't have anywhere else to stay. And I was pregnant and I had a 2-year-old, but I didn't know.
Yeah.
Yep. In hindsight, I was like, oh, that's probably was not a good idea. That's what I definitely would not recommend that. But I'm just saying, we've all been there. We've all done that stuff. We're all mums and we shouldn't feel guilty about that. But we should feel empowered if we educate ourselves so we can make better choices moving ahead in the future. And that's, I think, is what, from a building biologist perspective, we want people to realise. If you don't know, you don't know, but then you can't do anything about it. If you know that there is potential problems with wireless technology and magnetic fields, then we can actually make some changes. We can be aware of that and make the changes. But if we don't know anything about it, then we can't make any changes. And this is where being a conscious consumer comes in. Yeah, what I was talking about before, putting our money where the companies that are doing the right thing, that are being ethical, that care about our health, that are spending all this time making these beautiful products, such as personal care products without chemicals and petrochemicals and synthetic fragrances, Okay, that's another thing. I'm just going to do one thing. I'm just going to get rid of the synthetic fragrances in my house. And you'll probably be surprised, okay, the next time you run out of shampoo and conditioner, I'm just going to change that. I'm just going to change that. I'm going to find a better product, So it doesn't have to be this all-consuming, oh, my God, the world's going to end sort of thing. But I'm just going to take simple steps and I'm going to make these changes.
I think it's fantastic advice, and I'd really encourage the UA community to remember that this is actually it is like, as you say, Narelle, about empowering yourself. It's not about getting overwhelmed by just the sea of information that's out there, but I encourage the UA community. It's the whole reason that Undercover Architect exists, is to know that as a community, as a purchasing, decision-making, entity of people, we have within our power to completely change the industry across the board, from how we're treated by professionals to how, builders work with us, to the kinds of products and materials that we have available to us, to the types of homes that we get to create. So I think that when we understand that that's within our reach, and then we can gather the right team of people around us to fill that expertise gap, then it's an incredible opportunity to create homes that are going to be far better for us in the long run. So I can imagine when people are, you've talked a lot about kind of living on a day-to-day basis, which is awesome, because there are some really simple changes that you can make that will make a big difference. If you're building or renovating, obviously one of the biggest tips is to find a building biologist to be a part of your team, so that you can get some help. But if you're building or renovating and you're going about making these selections and those types of things, what would be sort of a couple of key things that you would recommend? We've talked about, your electrical layout and getting some understanding of that in regards to EMF. You talked about the inverse square rule. So actually, I'm just going to do a quick side note. What's the inverse square rule when it comes to EMF?
So if you've got your source here, as you double the distance, the strength of that field is going to drop off 75%. So this is where, remembering, so say if you've got a laundry on one side of the wall, a laundry on one side and a bedroom on the other, and you've got your washing machine and your dryer there, then what you don't want to do is place a bed where it backs up to those appliances, Whereas if you place the bed on the other side of the room and those appliances are running at night, it's really not so much of an issue because you're not close enough. That's why we suggest, as building biologists, so if you've got a digital clock radio, they can have massively high magnetic fields. You'd be surprised. The tiniest little thing, and it can just be spiking at 425 milligauss and all sorts of stuff. So we suggest having it 2 meters away from the bed because then it's not going to impact you.
Okay.
That sort of thing. Yeah.
So obviously, getting that electrical layout assessment and having that understanding. We've talked about enabling, designing for orientation and enabling the home to breathe so that you can limit the amount of condensation that's created in the home and the potential production of mold and those types of things as well. Are there any other kind of key things that you'd recommend people look at that are kind of no-brainers in terms of creating a healthy environment?
Ensuring that the exhaust fans are all vented externally and not into the roof cavity. You'd be surprised at how often that happens. So that's a biggie. It seems like a really basic thing, but you definitely want to ensure that no exhaust fans are vented into the roof cavity and that you have appropriate sized exhaust vents to do its job, plus an openable window. And that it's on the light switch timer so it automatically comes on when that room is in use. I always suggest things like that. Like we've talked about good design, a good building, good housekeeping practices, understanding good drainage, imperative. So if you don't have good drainage on the site and you end up with any sort of water pooling near your foundation, you're going to have a problem. We know how heavy the rains can be up here. So good drainage can be the difference between a healthy building and a non-healthy building, because if that water has got nowhere to go and it is impacting on the structure, then you will have problems. So I always suggest over-engineering the drainage because that is really, really important.
Brilliant. All right. So finding a good building biologist is obviously going to be key in all of this. What's your recommendation with assessing and finding good building biologists?
So we've got our association's website, the asbb.org.au. That's the Australasian Society of Building Biologists, so I'm president of that. We're actually having a conference in Sydney on the 27th of October, so if you want to come along and see some really amazing speakers and meet heaps of building biologists and learn more about the built environment and all of the different aspects of building biology, come and join us on the 27th of October. You can buy tickets on the website.
And Narelle, I'm going to have links to, because you've got an amazing website, you've got lots of information on your website, so I'm going to make sure that there's a link in the show notes, but you've particularly got a resource that people can opt in for that's really helpful. Do you want to tell people a bit more about that and also some other resources that you might recommend if they're starting to learn about building biology?
So I've got an ebook that you will receive if you sign up for my newsletter, and that just basically walks you through the different rooms of the house and gives you some suggestions of what to do. Then the other thing I would suggest doing is the chemical maze is fantastic. You can either have it as a little book or you can get the app, which is $9.99. Awesome little tool for when you're in the supermarket, for when you're assessing personal care products. It's really, really good. I suggest if you're starting out, just really starting to get label savvy, it's an excellent tool. And I think these days, I know it seems a little bit boring, but we really all need to get label savvy. We do need to understand labels and how to read them, because we really need to empower ourselves and be making these choices for ourselves. I can't sort of stress that enough, I'm afraid. If you get one thing out of this, I think if this myth that if it's on a supermarket shelf it's safe, it's really just not true.
It is. It's really hard because there is an assumption, isn't there, that if somebody's selling it to us, then somebody's done some check somewhere. And unfortunately, what is actually the case is a lot of products and chemicals that are used in Australian products are actually banned overseas. That's particularly relevant in the building industry. You also have an issue with some products that have falsified standard documents because they're being exported out of factories in China. And they're just the rate at which they're arriving in the country. It's very difficult to keep up with those things. So I think your earlier comment about making sure that information is included in your specification to your builder, that's kind of the overarching caveat, I think, that can really protect you for any building or renovation project. If your builder's going about finding substitutions, if you've got information in there, because there's going to be a myriad of decisions that need to be made that you may not get to be involved in based on the kind of builder that you're working with and the kind of project that you're doing. But if you have that specification in place, then you've got a legal contractual item that you can fall back on if substitutions get made that aren't in keeping, or decisions get made that aren't in keeping with what you specified in signing the contract. So it was, so I think getting a building biologist help with framing that specification is a really great piece of advice if this is an area of, expertise that you need in your project. So Narelle, I can't thank you enough. You've provided so much gold in this interview. It's been brilliant. And as I said, I'll put all of the links in the show notes so you can find Narelle. You can find Narelle works with clients in lots of different ways, so you can check out her website and see how she can work with you to get help on your building or renovation project. And you can also,
can I give you another couple of resources?
Oh yeah,
too?
sorry, yep, sorry, I cut you off. Yep.
No, that's all right. So I would also say, if you're really interested in this topic, Nicole's book is a really great read, A Healthy Home, Healthy Family. And the other community I want to tell you about is the chemfreecom.com community. That is a online directory that can help you find products and services Australia-wide. So I just wanted to let the readers, the people know about that as well.
Awesome. That's brilliant. Thank you. So, yeah, all of those links will be in the blog, on the show notes. And so, yeah, it's just fantastic information. So, as I said, Narelle, I can't thank you enough for joining us and for giving so generously of your expertise.
That's okay.
And your community, I really encourage you to check out Narelle's website and her company. And, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks, Amelia.